Hello and welcome to my channel, or to my subscribers, welcome back. New ones, hello! I am previously known as Wisconsin Cryptid in the Unknown. I changed it to Wisconsin Witch and Pagan because not only am I doing paranormal, true crime, paranormal, true crime, and witchy stuff, and also pagan stuff. Right now, I'll be reading an entry from Unsolved Murders that I got right before my mom passed. And some of them actually got solved, which is the Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls murders that happened in 96, 97. The John Benet Ramsey case is also getting, like, who killed her and whatnot. And you see my kid? She's adorable. But the first one is the Villisca Axe Murder House. And this is basically front. It says the Shrouded House, aka the Villisca Axe Murder House from 1912. Sorry. I also had my drink, so it helps with my throat and not having, to get up and whatnot. The residents of Villisca, Iowa, thought that little town was friendly, neighborly place. This illusion was shattered by a single terrible event. Life in Villisca would never be the same again. Okay, I'm just making sure what. Okay, we're good. It's a quiet Monday morning on June 10th, 1912. In the farming town of Villisca, Iowa, a woman named Mary Peckham was bustling about doing her chores when she noticed an odd stillness at about 7 in the morning. Normally by this time, Mary's neighbors would be bustling too. Instead, aside from the pendant mooing of cows waiting to be milked in the field, their house was silent. The house next door belonged to the popular and prosperous Marie Moore. Sorry, dyslexia that I have. Family. Parents: Josiah B., a businessman known as either JB or Joe, and Sarah, and their 4 children: 11-year-old Herman, 9-year-old Catherine, 7-year-old Boyd, and 5-year-old Paul. With that many kids, the house was rarely quiet. Worried, Mary called JB's brother, Ross, who used his key to get inside. He saw blood and asked her to fetch the town marshal. Back then, instead of saying like sheriff or chief, like Captain Chief, it's marshal, because they're in basically a farming town and whatnot. And there's a lot of theories behind this. Let me know in the comments down below. It'll be cool. Marshal Henry Hank Horton was similarly shaken after walking through the silent house. Somebody murdered in every bedding mode. As he went to fetch Dr. J. Clark Cooper, the first physician to examine the scene inside the house, the entire Moore family had been brutally slain, as had 2 young friends of the family, Lena and Ina Stillinger. Lena and Ina Stillinger. They were friends with the Moore children. And they heard everything because they were at the bottom in the guest room on the first floor. And the killer was in the attic. He murdered the parents first, then the children. And some say that I think it was Lena or Ina had their underwear pulled down to their ankle, nightgown hiked up, like moved to show her privates, and said that the killer basically might have raped one of the girls, and then he ate within the house while everyone was dead. And there's hatchet marks in the ceilings. If you ever go there and you see those hatchet marks, he was aiming the pointy part towards the head first before using the other side. So, crazy, right? The killer had wielded an axe using the blade to kill his victims, and then the handle to bludgeon their faces beyond recognition, before covering the heads with bedcloths. He also covered the mirrors as well. Like the killer covered the mirrors, covered their faces. He felt remorse when he did that. Plus, the reason why the mirrors were covered is to not have the souls trapped in the mirror. Look at one of the mansions down south that, aka Chloe, in the basically her story and whatnot. The mother and the two girls' spirits were trapped in the mirror that was not covered. So, very superstitious and whatnot. The mutilation was so severe that one Iowa newspaper misidentified the Stillinger girls as another pair altogether. The night before the deaths, JB and Sarah were at the local Presbyterian church watching their children perform Children's Day exercises. Drink time. Lena and Ina also took part, and the two girls, aged 11 and 8, respectively, were invited to stay the night at the Moore home because it seemed safer than having them walk home in the dark. The young guests were in a downstairs bedrooms. I said that. While the family was upstairs. Investigators determined Lena and Ina were the first victims, and that one of them had awakened, judging by a defense's wound that suggests she thrown up her arms to ward off a blow. It's possible that Sarah had also awoken during the attack. One neighbor told the police she thought she heard during the attack, like Sarah's voice in the night yelling, oh dear, don't. Now that's fucking terrifying. The Adams County Free Press reported all the bodies were found in a natural sleeping position with heads beaten almost to a pulp. It appeared the killer had taken pains to conceal himself. The blinds had been tightly drawn closed on the windows. Glass doors had been covered with articles of clothing. Even the mirrors inside the house had been shrouded. That's what I said before I read this part. The attack was not a robbery, as no valuables were taken or even disturbed. It seemed that the killer was in a rush. Police discovered 2 cigarette butts in the attic, implying that the killer or killers could have waited until the family were asleep before attacking them. In addition, the murderer had taken time to particularly clean the murder weapon before leaving it propped against the wall of the downstairs bedroom. The crime scene had some odd elements that still perplex researchers today. A slab of bacon was left leaning against the wall next to the axe, while another piece of bacon was found on the piano in the parlor. On the kitchen table was a plate of uneaten food and a bowl of bloody water. It's perhaps noteworthy, too, that Lena's nightgown had been pushed up, leaving her exposed, although doctors determined she had not been sexually assaulted. I literally said that one of them had their nightgown pulled up. Sorry, it's like when it comes to children murder, hell no, I would not do that. The police made a crucial error and failed to immediately secure the crime scene, allowing dozens of people to trample through the murder house. One suspect even had a portion of skull in his possession that he bragged to several witnesses belonging to JB. However, he was able to plausibly explain that he had simply picked up the piece of bone off the floor while viewing the crime scene. The investigators' best guess was the killer must have been a relative of the family, and early reports tossed out some names: Samuel Moyer, a brother-in-law of JB, and John Van Gilder, a former brother-in-law of Sarah. Moyer was in fact arrested, but later discounted because he had an alibi. Townspeople racked their brains for clues and alerted police to every stranger they had seen or unusual scenarios they'd witnessed. Groups of local people also searched barns and outbuildings hoping to catch the killer. May Van Gilbert, JB, and Sarah's 16-year-old niece said that the Saturday before the murder, a stranger had asked her where the Moores lived. When the girl later told Sarah of the inquiry, Sarah reportedly replied that someone's watch matching the stranger's description had been hanging around the Moores house. Sorry, I had to drink. That exchange prompted police to arrest a man in bloodstained shoes named John Ricks in Mammoth, Illinois. When May traveled to identify, she said they had the wrong man. A character named C.M. Brown then reached out to detectives and offered to obtain an image of the killer from the retina of Lena. The theory was that because Lena had awoken, the last sight she saw was the killer, and that image would be printed on her retina much like a photograph. Detectives agreed, and Brown said he recovered an image that indicates a man of stout build, very broad shoulders, and extraordinary length between the shoulders and hips. Unsurprisingly, this avenue proved another dead end. However, some tips were more promising. Cora McCoy, who lived 2 blocks from the Moore house, said she saw 2 strangers walk by at about 3 p.m. on Sunday afternoon, the day of the murders. The men walked closely together as if talking confidently. McCoy said she saw them again at dusk. One of them looked like a man named William Blackie Mansfield, a supposed army deserter and cocaine fiend, who 2 years later, after the Villisca murder, was a suspect in a similar ex-flame of his wife, daughter, father-in-law, and mother-in-law. Crazy, right? Another neighbor of the Moore, Marylanders, also saw 2 strangers walking towards their house. Hold on. I gotta sit cross-legged. Sorry, necklace. she said they paused to look at Moore's axe, which was in a chopping block in the yard. Several witnesses said that they spotted Iowa Senator Frank F. Jones and his son Albert in the town at the time of the murders. On the surface, this might seem harmless, but J.B. had worked for the Elder Jones farming equipment company before leaving to start a competing business. Jones was reportedly upset by his departure and by his nabbing of a lucrative John Deere contract. There were also rumors that J.B. was having an affair with Jones's daughter-in-law, Donna. It all made for bad blood, but it wasn't enough to kill. Okay. Local man Fred Fryer, Frank Millhiller, and Fern Robinson reported seeing J.B. talking to Senator Jones' son a few hours before the murders. Another man, Jim Bridewell, said he saw Albert Jones with Villisca Pool Hall owner W.B. Burt McCall. Garage owner E.M. Nelson said he spotted McCall behaving suspiciously in a rush about 9 p.m. on the night of the slayings. These witness statements led to the theories that Senator Jones, Albert Jones, Blackie Mansfield, and Burt McCall had worked together. A detective named James Wilkerson, you can tell I need to drink, who worked for the renowned Burns Detective Agency, was hired to investigate the killings after police came up empty-handed. In 1916, he announced he had solved it, stating that Senator Jones hired Mansfield to murder J.B. for hurting his business. The theory was bolstered by testimonies from Alice Willard, a woman required by Wilkins to help investigate the case. Willard said that on the night of the murder, she and two other women had driven home from Lincoln, Nebraska, when their car broke down near the Moore house. As she reached the back corner of the Moore lot, she saw 5 men talking in hushed voices. While she couldn't hear much of their conversation, she said she picked out some key words and phrases: money, Sunday, after church, and get Joe first. The rest will be easy. She recognized one of the men as Senator Jones. Some investigators questioned why Alice Willard had waited 4 years to share her evidence. She claimed she had been too afraid to come forward earlier. Wilkerson's claims to have cracked the case was heralded with huge headlines. "Great crime at Villisca is now solved," read one of Marshallstown, Iowa. The story reported that Mansfield had not been hired to kill J.B. Moore, but was also responsible for the double axe murder 4 days prior in Pola, Kansas, of Roland Hutchinson and his wife, who were also murdered while they slept. The allegations against Mansfield were brought before a grand jury, but Mansfield's employer provided records showing that he had been in Illinois at the time of the murders. Mansfield was never charged and later successfully sued the Burns Detective Agency in Wilkinson's for $2,250. As for Senator Jones, his career was ruined by the allegations, and he unsuccessfully attempted to sue Wilkerson's for slander, despite no charges being brought against Jones and Mansfield. Ross Moore, J.B.'s brother, and Joe Stillinger, Lena and Ina's father, continued to believe Wilkerson's theory. Neither the Villisca nor the Polar killings were the only axe murders of the area. There was a string of similar killings throughout the Midwest, many of which were ascribed to Henry Lee Moore, no relation to the Moores of Villisca. Moore had been found guilty in the murder of his mother and grandmother in December 1912. The U.S. Department of Justice agent M.W. McCrary analyzed that he could be responsible for as many as 23 more, including the Villisca deaths. McClary pointed to similarities beyond the murder weapon. Each victim was slain in their home with exponentially brutality. In each case, a bloody axe was found nearby. He also noted that the axe murder started in late April 1911 and stopped in mid-December 1912, a window of time during which Henry Moore was out of prison. In their book, The Man from the Train, Bill James and Rachel McCarthy James claimed that Paul Mueller, a German immigrant farmhand, was a serial killer who traveled by train and killed families with their own axes. The Villisca slaying is one of many killings they pinned on this elusive character. Some townspeople said they had spotted Mueller shortly before midnight on the night of the murders, and he seemed to be in a rush. After the bodies were discovered, a nationwide manhunt ensued, with Miller reportedly holding up in Wisconsin, New York, Pennsylvania, and beyond. He was never found. Goddamn. One suspect was actually tried for the Villisca deaths. The morning of the bodies were found, a reverend by the name of Lynn George Kelly left Villisca by train at about 5:20 in the morning. On the train, long before the bodies had been discovered, he allegedly told fellow travelers that there were eight dead souls back in town who had been butchered in their beds. Word of this prompted investigators to take a close look at Kelly, who had arrived in town the morning of the murders and even attended the children's days in which the youngsters had performed. Kelly allegedly mailed a bundle of blood-soaked clothing to a laundry soon after the murders. 2 weeks later, he returned to Villisca and, posing as a detective, joined the tour of the murder house. He inserted himself further into the case by claiming that about 1 in the morning, he had actually heard the thud of an axe that killed the 8 victims. Kelly had a history of mental illness and reluctant odd behavior. He was schizophrenic, and there was no doubt about that, said Ed Epperly, a PhD at Lutheran College in Decorah, Iowa, who studied the case for nearly 40 years. I think the motive was sexual. Epperly points to the uplifted nightgown on one of the victims and draws parallel between that and Kelly's habit of window peeking. Kelly had also been charged twice with sending obscene materials in mail, asking young girls to pose nude for him. Fucking pervert! In 1917, a grand jury heard evidence against Kelly and indicted him for the Villisca murders. As he awaited trial, Kelly even confessed to the murders, saying God told him, "Suffer the little children to come unto me, and slay utterly." However, Kelly recanted his confession at trial, and the jury deadlocked 11-1 for acquittal. A second jury acquitted Kelly in November 1917. Public opinion in Villisca was divided. Some residents thought Senator Jones was the culprit, while others were convinced Kelly was the killer. It really tore the community apart, said filmmaker Kelly Randall, who made a 2004 movie about the murders called Villisca, Living with the Mystery. The case has also acquired a supernatural era. The Villisca house has been investigated by numerous ghost hunters who claim to have encountered paranormal phenomena, helping to make the building a tourist attraction. Visitors can even stay there overnight. While modern forensic science would probably have solved the Villisca case in 1912, Even fingerprints were still new, and law enforcement cooperation across state lines was poor. The result, the case has remained unsolved for over a century. And Sam and Colby, you probably heard of them. They investigated the Villisca murder house. They believe it was this mysterious killer, Mueller, who went from town to town because of the train and killed the parents, the Moore family, and the Salinger siblings. And A felt remorse, covered up the windows and the mirrors, posed Lena to make it look like she was sexually assaulted, which she wasn't, and also Project Fear went to that place like once during Destination Fear, their time as Destination Fear, but went back again for their YouTube channel, Project Fear. So